Andrew Johnson from England. Actually, this gentleman has given presentations and written and posted a number of articles on various websites about 9/11, about Mars, about chemtrails and anti-gravity research, while challenging some of the authorities to address some of the most compelling data that is available. His website is www.checktheevidence.com, and he recently attended a conference in Europe called the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement back in November, and actually attended that conference with Dr. Judy Wood. Now, before I turn it over and introduce Andrew Johnson to you, I want to tell you this is how I had met Andrew Johnson. I had discovered Dr. Judy's information about her book. I think shortly before I conversed with him in a comment thread, I had discovered through the video the Jesse Ventura. It was a video that I had listened to audio. Jesse Ventura talking with Alex Jones about Dr. Judy's information. And Jesse Ventura since then obviously has done a lot for the world to release Dr. Judy's information that he believes is very, very important. Now, Andrew Johnson met me in a comment thread. I had just started learning about her information, and I was immediately starting to talk to people in comment threads. And he brought something to my attention that was so impactful and helped me kind of focus on the task at hand, and that was to learn about all of the evidence. And before I was prepared to start communicating what I had discovered, it was important for me not to muddle up the terminology. Because, ladies and gentlemen, since 9/11, since that horrifying event, and this happens with a lot of things that have occurred here in the world, we have been under a psyop. We've been conditioned and trained to hear certain words and think certain things to take us away from the real truth and the real facts and the real evidence. So Andrew actually introduced me to that term muddled, and I, in reading his comment threads, very, very responsibly said, look, you have to look at the evidence very, very clearly and obviously communicate that, but be very cautious not to step over the line of assisting the PSYOP. So you have to be very, very cautious as to how you speak of these things, and you also need to be very cognizant of the fact that you're conversing with people, in some cases, who are employed to be there to oppose everything that you're saying about 9/11 evidence, such as what Dr. Judy Wood has revealed, is that the possibility that directed energy weapons were used on 9/11. And we shall be opposed by that, especially if free energy that is available for the entire world could potentially put an oil industry out of business. They have a lot of spare cash to spend in opposing what we're about to talk about here today. So, Andrew Johnson, 2 months ago, I think it was approximately, that we had met in that comment thread, and since then I've learned so much about two things: Dr. Judy Wood's evidence, as well as how to counter the PSYOP and deal with the so-called trolls that are out there on the internet. It's a very, very interesting phenomena. And welcome to the Pete Santilli Show.
Oh, thanks, Pete. Thanks for inviting me on, and obviously, thank you very much for featuring, all the research so heavily in your recent series of programs and so on. It's very important, as you know, that more people become aware and are given a chance to think about things, with a clear view, as you were saying there in the introduction, rather than having sort of hurdles in the way and things slightly subtly changed. And it's a minefield, it really is.
It is, and I sense that just looking at your interest in following some of these very important topics, I believe that you had that same level of curiosity that I've always had about discovering the truth, about learning the truth. And I think you've approached it in a very sound, sane way, and you've learned a lot through that process, haven't you?
Very much so, yes. And I think you've used the key word there, and that is curiosity. And if people are not curious, then they really won't, sort of take those first steps into uncovering things and then following through on that. When in other words, if you have a basic level of curiosity, you're looking at why there is inconsistency in things, why certain things don't seem to make sense. And if you keep your antennae finely tuned and finely adjusted, you can see, the difficulty comes where you're faced with a pitch which, 95% of it makes sense, and then there's this remaining 5%, which it seems to be very important, but that also doesn't make sense. And so you then go into that 5% and try and explore it. And it's like, you're talking about these trolls, and these trolls come in different flavors. There are people that are out and out debunkers and will just attack you and insult you before actually making any kind of argument. And then there are those trolls who will befriend you, they will buddy up to you, they will say nice things about you, and then they'll take you 95% of the way with your discussion, and then that remaining 5%, when you start to discuss that, they will attack you and say that you're an idiot, which is essentially what happened to me in my involvement with one of the 9/11 research groups, which formed in 2005, 2006. So that was my experience, and it all seemed perfectly fine, and everyone seemed to be, willing to look at the evidence. But then when this particular evidence, which came up for discussion, which it was perfectly consistent, perfectly well documented, but they didn't want to discuss that evidence. They didn't want to talk about it, and when you tried to talk about it, they just skipped over it. Or if you really hammered home the point, they'd change the subject, or after that they'd insult you. These were some of the things that weren't making sense to me at the time that I first came across what Dr. Judy Wood had started to research and post on the internet for the first time.
Now, I want to really delve into this because you have studied it and I have studied it, and I think you've seen me. I call it getting in there and scrapping with the trolls to really understand and learn how to differentiate somebody with a negative attitude that opposes a theory and then wants to get in there and counter it. Or here's the next thing that people do not realize is happening, and that is what I'm calling, it's like a black ops on the internet, where we have a secret presence of either government-sponsored or corporate-sponsored individuals that get in there to meld themselves in with society, with internet society, and to mold and shape the threads, the comment threads that you're reading. Because to the honest observer that gets into a comment thread on any particular topic, if they take a glance at the general topic of conversation, if that message is controlled by these operatives, they've helped sway people away from the true evidence, and they're very, very skilled at this. Is this not only a concerted effort, but a grand conspiracy taking place on the internet right now?
Well, I think it's a mixture of things, really, and sometimes it's difficult to categorize the certain posters into one or two of those areas, because there is definitely you get the leaders and the followers, basically. I mean, I've written a lot about in my book, for example, just to give a couple of examples for people to go and research into if they wish. I've written quite a lot about Jim Fetzer, for example, because I interacted with him personally. I never met him. Well, actually, I did meet him personally in London in 2010, which was a strange sort of scenario for me to be in at the time. But I corresponded with him a lot by email, and he invited me to join this scholars group. And so I was able to essentially determine for myself that this guy was acting as a leader, to trying to lead other groups of people off the path where the evidence was leading to. And I can prove that, I think. And if somebody was to come to me and say, well, look, we've now got the evidence that we have a group of people that are covering up the biggest crime of the millennium, and we want to prosecute them, and we think Jim Fetzer is one of those people, would you be willing to testify in court against this person? I would say yes, because I have the evidence of my personal interactions with him, which I've documented, to prove that this guy is helping to cover up what really happened on 9/11. He's helping to pervert the course of justice, as we call it here, which is itself a crime. So you get, at the one end of the scale, you get people like him. Now, Is he being paid to do what he's doing? Is he being given money? Has he got a gun to his head? In other words, if he doesn't do this, something awful will happen to him or his family, or, they'll take his house away from him or something. I don't have the answers to those questions. Mm-hmm. But, from his actions, you can see what he's up to. So he's at one end of the scale. Then you'll get at the other end of the scale anonymous posters on the internet who will make completely false statements, such as the towers did not turn to dust, they collapsed and burned down. Mm-hmm. And we can see from the evidence that is a false statement. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those people, they're anonymous. You have no idea where they've come from. Mm-hmm. They use ridiculous sounding handles. And so you have no proof who they are. You have no proof of what their agenda is. And is people's opinion swayed by those things? Well, I think ultimately it is, because when you do a Google search and you get all this trash coming up about a particular person, something that we've experienced is that people will read the trash and they don't have time to sort through the trash to actually find the real evidence. So, if you Google my name or Dr. Judy Wood's name or, a certain combination of keywords and it comes up with trash, you're just going to end up with reams of websites to work through before you get the reference to, say, my book or Dr. Judy Wood's book. Mm-hmm. And then only a few people will go off and actually buy that book and then go and read it. So that's the way that it works. I call it signal to noise ratio.
There you go.
So if you can generate a lot of noise and make a few statements which are true mixed in with a lot that aren't, then for people that haven't studied this I've been studying this for coming up for 10 years now. Mm-hmm. For people that have not invested that amount of time in it, they've got very little chance of actually finding out what's going on. So in terms of the posters, yes, I'd say we have people who are actually guiding things on the internet. They're directing certain forum discussions, and then we've got other websites such as Veterans Today, which are posting certain articles by people like Jeff Prager, who I corresponded with, and I wrote an article about Jeff Prager's correspondence with me. Mm-hmm. This guy comes across as being very polite, very nice, and he's a magazine publisher and so on. And yet he claims that nuclear devices were used to destroy the World Trade Center.
Right.
And when I challenge him on this, he later writes back an email to me and says that I'm an idiot. And a twit.
Right.
And those were the words that he used. Yeah. But whether I'm an idiot or a twit is really immaterial to the properties of nuclear devices causing explosions, because everyone knows that such things are very hot. They create a lot of heat. They create a lot of light. Mm-hmm. But to listen to this guy, he sounds sincere. He believes his own story. He believes what he's saying.
Right.
And you listen to some of these people, and that's how they get away with it. This Dmitry Karlazov is another character who's convinced a lot of people that he's telling the truth, mm-hmm. and he sounds sincere.
Right.
So how is he doing this? How is he sounding sincere? Is he just a very good actor, or is he under some form of other influence which we don't fully accept or understand in our everyday sort of experience?
You mentioned Veterans Today, and I hope you don't mind me. I do want to go on the record here, officially, formally, and publicly, that I've been able to myself clearly establish those individuals right now in alternative media who want to cover all of the evidence. For instance, the evidence that's contained in Dr. Judy Wood's investigation that was filed with the federal court system. Those that are willing to bring that information forward are typically the ones that are not compromised or tainted. But those that are opposing that are either being fed information from the top to deter them and detract them, and they need to discover the truth. But Veterans Today, there's a gentleman named Gordon Duff. He is a very well-known person over there in, I would consider it alternative media. But Gordon Duff, I have tried to get on the show and I'm not going to talk about the details as to why he did not come on the show about a week or two ago. But I'm going to encourage Gordon Duff, somebody like him who has had high-level contacts in the government and so on and so forth, and a lot of people talking in his ear. Now, whether or not this Jim Fetzer has been fed the wrong information, eventually they come to believe the stuff that they've been told. And I'm hoping that Gordon Duff comes on my show and reveals the fact that he just doesn't know enough about Dr. Judy Wood's evidence to get out there and to counter it. A lot of that stuff has happened in alternative media outlets, and I think that people have been swayed by individuals at the top. Don't you agree?
Well, there's a lot of swaying going on. I think that's the way a lot of it works. And, you are who you associate with, I suppose, is an expression that a friend of mine used. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Okay. With Gordon Duff, I've not not personally interacted with Gordon Duff myself, but I have seen recent postings of him stating publicly that what he's written for Veterans Today.
Andrew, stay right there. We have 5 seconds here. We're going to go to a break and come back, and let's talk about who these possible influencers are at the top when we come back. Not to burn bridges per se, okay? I want to formally, and I'm going to say this publicly, that I want to invite the honorable, I say honorable in journalistic circles, Gordon Duff, to have a discussion with me about the fact that he may be skipping over some of the most important evidence of our lives, and that is the evidence contained in the book Where Did the Towers Go? So I want to invite Gordon Duff to the show and to clearly establish whose side he's on. And if he opposes disclosing this evidence, then we know exactly what side anyone is on, and that could be applied to just about anybody at the top of the food chain. Now, who these people at the top of the food chain are has been investigated and filtered through very diligently, very methodically, very fairly, I believe. I think that you're going to, before the end of the show, realize that Andrew Johnson, for his own well-being and education, has tried to figure out who these individuals are. So, Andrew, who do you think these key players are, these key influencers at the top of, let's say, the scientific community, like a Stephen Jones, a Jim Fetzer? Can you please tell us what you've been able to find up to this point as to who's who and what they're doing, and whether or not their intentions are good or bad, what side they're on?
Well, I think, again, it comes down to them, as you were saying, discussing particular sorts of evidence and the way that they discuss it in terms of, particularly what Dr. Judy Wood has put together, obviously, because that's the main central thing of what we're talking about. And, I've written a lot about Jim Fetzer, as I said, and that's in my book, 9/11 Finding the Truth, which you can download free from checktheevidence.com. There is also a Kindle version and an iPad version, which are free, depending on where you get them. And there's also an MP3 audiobook version, which is also free. So I've tried to make this information as widely available as I can with the resources that I've got. The best thing for people to do following this is to download that and read as much as they can, so that they've got chance to see whether I'm just talking nonsense, or whether when I was saying I would take this to court, whether that's actually a justifiable statement, which I would say that it is. Yes, Jim Fetzer is one. He, just a very brief summary with him. He invited me, and Stephen E. Jones invited me to join the Scholars for 9/11 Truth Group, which formed at the beginning of, the end of 2005, stroke the beginning of 2006, and I became sort of quite good friends with them. In terms of, I thought we all shared the same goal of exposing the truth about 9/11. But then when I started to realise that what Dr. Wood had been putting on the table was being covered up and marginalised, and I started to say, hang on a minute, what about this research here? They became less and less kind of friendly, I suppose you'd say. And Jim Fetzer ended up insulting me, calling me childish, saying that I was a poor student of logic. And this was about 6 months after he'd invited me personally to join the steering committee of the 9/11 Scholars Group. Now, that should give you a clue as to how some of these people operate, because what he was trying to do initially was keep me keep tabs on me. They'd spotted me posting arguments based on physics around the internet. That's why they invited me into the scholars group. He then thought he'd invite me onto this steering committee to make me feel important, to make me feel I could contribute something positive to the group. When in actuality, the steering committee never did anything. There was nothing to do, basically. And so it was just done as a way, I think, of making me feel important. But I'm not one of those people that wants to feel important. I don't want that. I just want to know what's what, basically, and make sure that I'm passing that information on to other people accurately. And the big clue really came when Dr. Wood established the link to the Hutchison effect, because that immediate time when that research was being developed, I suppose, or put out into the public domain, that's when he started to attack me the most heavily. And also when we started to talk about the connection of Stephen E. Jones, who was involved in cold fusion research in the late 80s, and is mentioned 100 times in Dr. Eugene Mallow's book, Fire from Ice. When we started to talk about that, Jim Fetzer wasn't really that bothered about talking about that. And, of course, Stephen E. Jones wasn't particularly either. And that really, to me, was a very, very big indicator that the energy issue was extremely important in what happened on 9/11. So Stephen E. Jones, his job in the 9/11 research community was essentially to try and herd people together in the scholars group was one venue to attack the people that were presenting the most compelling evidence for something very important, and that in this case was primarily Dr. Wood. Jones didn't really attack me. I mean, I haven't really got any scientific credentials of any particular note, so I was of no threat to them. But he did try and sort of say that I was acting to not allow scientific fairness or something. I can't remember the exact words he used in this message, but he didn't correspond with me very much. He didn't try and he never contradicted anything that I said about him, and neither has Jim Fetzer, for that matter. He's never denied anything. I've put on my website that he's singled himself out as somebody who's willing to cover up the crime of 9/11, and he's never argued with that one either. So if he wants to sue me for libel or whatever, then he hasn't done so, and neither has anyone else for that matter. There was another person who did try and sue me for libel, and that was Alfred Weber. Alfred Weber runs a website called Peace in Space. He runs a website called exopolitics.com, and I became familiar with him in my study of the UFO field. He was very interesting in that he interviewed Dr. Judy Wood and John Hutchison together. He's actually one of the few people to do that. He personally interviewed Dr. Judy Wood and John Hutchison together at his house in February 2008. He got the evidence from the horses' mouths, and he agreed with them. At that time, I've got a recording of that, and he actually said, yes, this is huge, this is enormous, this is big. We can see the energy connection quite clearly now, thanks to your research. When are you going to publish a scientific paper? 6 months later, he has his own radio show, and he gets on somebody called Loren Murray, who claims to have been a geoscientist at Lawrence Livermore Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, and he says to her at the start of this interview, so why did you think HAARP destroyed the World Trade Center? And she says, well, actually, it was Dr. Judy Wood's research that made me think that. And then Alfred Weber says, now, without mentioning Dr. Judy Wood, tell me why you think HAARP destroyed the World Trade Center. So if that's not a muddle-up and a cover-up right there,
wow,
I don't know what is. He was making it plain, and I've got audio clips of them saying that, so people can actually hear that recording rather than me just, sort of making that up.
Yes, sir.
So Alfred Weber is another one. He's involved with the cover-up.
Now, Andrew, before we go to our break, we have a caller on the line. Would you mind if I took a caller real quick?
Not at all.
Okay. We have Stephen On the line, you're live on the Pete Santilli Show. We have just a couple minutes here. Do you have a question for Andrew Johnson?
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you think maybe Fetzer is just jealous of the publicity that's something that competes with some of his sort of, take on things? If he's more concerned with that, he seems like he's almost more of that than he is a COINTELPRO agent. I really want to, I really think that Dr. Wood is on to the real thing, but I think that it's not solidified, and I think all these other countering sort of arguments still need to go on until we get to the truth. But attacking all these guys personally, it's like, who even cares? Who even cares about what Fetzer thinks?
Well, it's important, Stephen, and I'm going to let Andrew address this because we are going to cover this right after this break. But go ahead, Andrew. I'll let you answer that.
Right. One of the strategies is that if somebody attacks us, if somebody attacks me and calls me whatever, which is documented in my book, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, then we have to respond. Now, this is one of the strategies of the psychological operation. As soon as you attack somebody, they can either just ignore it or respond. Now, if I ignore it, then it can be taken that whatever is said about me is actually true and I can't respond to it. However, if I respond, then it's assumed that I'm infighting. So,
right.
It's sort of a no-win situation once the person who's made an attack makes the attack.
I agree.
So going back to your question, I haven't answered your question about Fetzer yet.
Sure.
Is it to do with jealousy? Well, I've considered all those things, and the only way you'll know that I've considered all those things is if you read the articles that I've written, which you can download. You can either view the individual articles on my website, and you can see the emails from Jim Fetzer, or you can read the whole book. So, is it jealousy? Is it jealousy? I would say no. It goes way beyond jealousy. But you'd have to read the articles to find out.
The way he got I think he's kind of like a snob when it comes to sort of his education and everything. And when Judy was teaming up with what's the guy's name, the Canadian guy that you guys.
And by the way, it's Dr. Judy Wood. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I think she's a genius. Yes, Dr. Judy Wood. But when she was teaming up with the Canadian guy who doesn't have a real formal education, that's where the whole Fetzer divide started to occur. And then he seems like an insecure child for the most part when he's criticizing Judy. He agrees with her, Dr. Judy Wood, but then at the same time he always takes a shot at her not closing the loop. But that's all he's got. And I listen to Fetzer, but I know he's limited in that scope.
Stephen, have we covered everything? We're going to go to a break here. I didn't want to interrupt you. Are we okay? Did you get all your questions out for Mr. Johnson?
I did. I'm sorry. It's always tough to talk to you, Pete. I hope I don't overtalk you because you're such a polite guy. But anyway, great show. And I just want to hear more about Dr. Judy Wood's theories and less about the infighting and all that crap. Nobody cares about it.
Yes. Actually, we do care about the infighting. This is important. When a psychological operation is perpetrated upon the American public to shape their minds, we want to find out who is talking into their ears. It's really important. We come back, we're going to talk about how Alex Jones is so important in this regard. It's important that we bring him up. We'll be right back. We were just talking through the break. I mean, and I thought it was important for Stephen to get out, and I think he said this before on our show. Why is it important to bring up these people? Let's just talk about the evidence. Well, I would say that it is the equivalent. Learning who these people are just as big a part of the evidentiary package, okay, because the cover-up that has taken place before, during, and after 9/11 has been the most damaging thing to our society, because if they're going to herd, they're going to attack, they're going to credentialize, establish credibility with their scientific education and all those things, and then out there blurting to distract us away from the evidence. Don't you think, Andrew Johnson, that is probably the biggest thing we need to understand as to why this evidence has been sitting here for so many years, and we're so surprised by it, when we discovered after 10 years,
Absolutely, and I mean, the caller Steve made a point about not talking about the infighting and stuff. Well, yeah, but I don't like talking about that sort of thing. But it's necessary to understand how the cover-up works, and that's what I've tried to do. Dr. Wood reverse-engineered what happened to the World Trade Center, and I think if you read 9/11: Finding the Truth, I've tried to reverse engineer the cover-up, and we were talking a bit in particular about the actions of Jim Fetzer and the way that he's able to manipulate people. Now, for example, one of those techniques of manipulation was brought up, I think, in the chat room by somebody, and that was the Vancouver hearings which happened in the summer. And he actually invited Dr. Wood to go to those conferences, but because he'd previously threatened her and said that if she didn't back off her relations with John Hutchison, there was a chance. If she backed off her relations with John Hutchison, there was a chance that her reputation could be salvaged. That's what Jim Fetzer wrote to Dr. Wood in an email in 2008, and I've got that in my book if people want to actually read the exact words, and it's on my website. So when somebody is using language like that, that essentially is a threat. So why would you want to go and speak at somebody's conference who is threatening you? And this is what people don't understand, because they don't have the available evidence, such as that in the email and more, which we couldn't really discuss easily in an open forum. But that is one that we can discuss and has been discussed by myself on several occasions. So why would this fellow organise a conference in Vancouver, invite her, then she doesn't reply because she's been threatened previously by this chap, and he's done nothing to repair that situation. He then invites somebody else who's not a scientist to present Dr. Judy Wood's research, rather than, for example, showing the DVD which I produced in 2011 with all the up-to-date research. He could have shown that at the conference free of charge, at no expense, but instead he decides he would invite somebody else by the name of Claire Kuhn to present this evidence and do the best job she could do, which actually, if you go and look at the best job she could do, introduces nuclear devices which were not in Dr. Wood's presentation. It introduces a lot of spelling mistakes which were not in Dr. Wood's presentation. It introduces tiny thumbnail images which were very blurred and not in Dr. Wood's presentation. So why would somebody like Jim Fetzer want to sanction a person doing that at a conference in Vancouver, which is outside of the United States of America, by the way, flying up all those people from the United States to Canada? Why exactly would he want to do that? Is that jealousy? I don't think so. I think that's going some way beyond jealousy. And if people want to find out the details, I suggest they read the article about what those Vancouver hearings were for. And I would suggest it was to encourage debate and actually reduce the level of certainty. In other words, there is no need to debate what happened to the World Trade Center anymore, because it is already known what happened to it. It's a bit like debating, whether the buildings are there or not. We could debate whether the World Trade Center is there or not, but it would be a pointless debate because we know that they're not there anymore. And this is another of the way that the psychological operations works, that if you encourage debate about something, you then implicitly assume that the truth is not known. And that's another of the tactics that Jim Fetzer has continued to use over the last 3 or 4 years. And there are many people who are willing to help him with this. Was it HAARP? Was it fluoride? Was it this? Was it that? Was it mini-nukes? Well, we're not really sure if nanothermite exists in this form, so it might have been a secret military version of nanothermite. All of this stuff, it's all encouraging debate and discouraging the fact that we know what happened to the World Trade Center. We know that it was destroyed with an energy weapon. We know that energy weapon has some similarity to the Hudson effect in terms of the effects that it creates. We don't know if it's exactly the same thing. We know that Science Applications International Corporation, for example, was involved in helping to write the NIST World Trade Center reports. We know that they were in charge of ground zero security. We know that Science Applications International Corporation do research into directed energy weapons because that information is posted on their website. The same can be said of Applied Research Associates. So if people want to know about 9/11, I think they need to be really focusing their attention on these companies and writing to them and asking them the tough questions about why they were willing to participate in a science fraud in relation to the technical reports of the destruction of the World Trade Center. I think that would be a good thing for people in your country to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want you to speak to also. I believe that this is a very, very important thing, that the people at the top of, I call it the food chain of information, that are dictating and controlling this message, because it's almost a scientific. When you say that you reverse engineered the cover-up, I mean, you've also looked at the fact that they've used the credentials, the education, the credibility of all these people that are propagating falsities. Talk about that credentialization, because a lot of people follow and say, well, so-and-so has this degree, and he's the most renowned scientific researcher in the area of, small nukes.
Absolutely, and in fact, find there's actually a relatively small number of people with PhD degrees who are looking at the evidence at this sort of level. We could really, certainly Jim Fetzer, for example, though he has a PhD, it's not in science; it's in the philosophy of science. So he's not actually a scientist. Stephen E. Jones does have a PhD, but we know that he was associated with the cold fusion cover-up, and you can read about that in Dr. Mallow's book. There are very few other science PhDs that are involved in this. There was another PhD that people sometimes bring up, and that's Dr. Greg Jenkins of the University of Maryland. He was last heard of in 2007. I think he's published one or two papers, possibly mid to late 2007, in this website which is called the Journal of 9/11 Studies, which was set up by Stephen E. Jones. And isn't it peculiar that the Journal of 9/11 Studies, if you spell that out, is the word Jones, which is rather odd.
That is.
So there's not that many well-qualified scientists actually putting stuff out there about 9/11. Dr. Judy Wood is the most highly qualified scientist who's actually done this forensic study. I don't think there's anybody else that comes close, frankly. But the credentialism was used on me. I mean, you can read about that in what Fetzer tried to sort of say to me. He tried to sort of pull the credentialism card on me, but I didn't really try and play a card in return, because I don't have one. I don't have the scientific credentials, as I've said before.
Right.
And of course, John Hutchison, for example, doesn't have any high-level qualifications. He doesn't have a university degree. He doesn't have a college education. And yet he has got letters from the Canadian government which state that reports about his own research have been classified top secret, for example. John Hutchison has 500 pounds of metal samples. One of the people who helped carry some of those metal samples from the car to the lecture theatre in Seattle in May 2008, he actually then became convinced by Jim Fetzer that those samples were all fake. Even though he'd physically handled them himself, he became convinced that those samples were fake. That's how strong the psychological operation is, that people who've actually held physical evidence can become convinced later, because somebody can, perform a psychological operation on them, that what they previously understood to be true, real physical evidence, is no longer relevant, or no longer valid.
Can I expound upon this? And I'm sorry to interrupt you. And you have to, and I'm balancing this out, me as the curious individual, because I believe that it's very, very important the credentials. I mean, like, for instance, Dr. Judy Wood's credentials to talk about interferometry, right? Obviously, she's an expert in that area. But it's important to know that the people that are presenting this evidence to you are qualified to do so, to understand it and to be able to translate it into a language we can understand. So I'm not taking away from that, but let me reverse engineer this thing for the listeners to why this has been used against us. Because if, for instance, tritium is discovered in the dust, they thereby go out and find a nuclear expert that can give every single justification for tritium being contained in that dust, in that evidence. And they sway the minds of the people with their justification for why tritium is there to include everything but the possibility of cold fusion or low energy nuclear reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that you made me think of there, Pete, is the timing. Mm-hmm. Now, just to give you an example of the way that these PSYOPs work, as you mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we went to this Global Breakthrough Energy Movement conference, and present at that conference was another fairly well-known speaker who's built up a bit of a reputation for himself, Sterling Allen. And I can tell you that he became quite agitated when the tritium was being discussed in Dr. Wood's presentation. And then soon after that, Stephen E. Jones published a new letter or something. I don't know whether it was a letter or he said he'd done a new experiment relating to Pons and Fleischmann's cold fusion research in the 80s, which Sterling Allen then proceeded to quote. It seemed very much to me as if the exposure of this tritium evidence at the conference had rattled a few cages, because Stephen E. Jones felt it necessary to come out of retirement to supposedly perform an experiment related to cold fusion, which he hasn't done, I think, for probably at least 10 years. So when you get these things being made public, and then other groups or other researchers posting new things specifically to try and debunk those observations, such as the ones you were referring to about the tritium,
right,
that to me is highly suggestive that those bits of information are vitally important to actually confirming that this is indeed an energy phenomenon that we're looking at in terms of what happened to the World Trade Center.
That's right.
And indeed it's related to cold fusion or low energy nuclear reactions, and that people need to be distracted away from that and made to doubt that,
right,
so that it's not discussed. So I think that's another aspect of the way that these psychological operations are working, the timing of them.
Right. Now, how we as the layperson, I'm going to consider myself a layperson, I'm waking up to all of this. I'm not a scientist who is credentialed, but I will say this, I can hold a nuclear scientist who comes forward to justify the presence of tritium. I will hold that person accountable to their credentials if they're excluding the possibility that tritium is a byproduct of cold fusion. I will actually hold their credentials against them if they choose. And this is where the layperson can say, okay, what side of the agenda is this guy on? He is a credentialed nuclear scientist. Why is he not mentioning cold fusion or the possibility of that? What is he trying to conceal?
Well, I think it becomes difficult in those areas because we as lay people, we have to take their word for it. And that's the way that the credentialisms works at times. They'll make a statement and you assume that they're telling the truth because of their credentials, when in actuality they may be telling the best version of the story as they know it and they've been taught it. But then you have to consider the underlying possibility that what they've been taught is incorrect. And that incorrect knowledge has been in place for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And all that they studied and presented has been based on that incomplete or incorrect knowledge. And then when somebody like me comes along and says, but have you considered the Hutchison effect? They'll say, the Hutchison effect, what's that? I'll go and Google it. And then they'll find all these articles debunking John Hutchison and saying that he makes fake upside-down videos. And they'll come back to you as a credentialed scientist and say, but these videos that John Hutchison has produced are all fake, and there is no scientific evidence to show that what he's been doing is real.
Right.
And because because it's very, very difficult to reproduce his experimental setup, then it's hard to take that back for them to take that back into the laboratory, and go forward from there. And so this is why we're in this difficult area with this particular phenomenon.
Oh yes.
That it's been reproduced many times by John. He can tell other people how to do it, but because they don't believe it, because their science doesn't explain it, they're not willing to try to reproduce it, because if they do, it means that a lot of their textbooks and so on are going to have to go in the bin. because or in the trash, as you would say. So so that's one of the problems as well. We're looking at some knowledge which is so fundamental and so powerful and so world-changing that people have a very, very hard time accepting that it's not been discovered before.
Very, very complex thoughts, but it needs to be recognized. Everyone can understand that credentialism is so complex that it could be used. It could be used against us. For instance, towards me, like Pete Santilli, you're not qualified to talk about Dr. Judy's evidence because you're a non-scientist. That could be used as a means to hurt, attack, distract. Right now, I'm going to play a brief audio clip here. We have just a couple minutes here. I may have to bring it, but let me bring this up here real quick. Here's Mr. Fetzer quizzing John Hutchinson.
Okay.
Now, Judy, I've been informed that we have John Hutchison on the line. So, John, I want to welcome you to the Dynamic Duo.
Hello.
John, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your education, especially your training in science and technical subjects?
Well, my education is I flunked my coloring book and blocks. I'm self-taught, and I've been involved in many applications in engineering and research, and one of them happened to be into Nikola Tesla, which...
We come back. We're going to finish that recording. This is important. Don't you dare go away. Credentialism. Bet you never heard of that term before. So here publicly, I'm going to declare myself an advocate of truth by revealing the fact that what took place on 9/11, I believe that they want to conceal it from us because they don't want us to know that energy is available to us freely. That the energy that was used is available to all of us if it's used for good, but it was used for evil, and that's why they want to keep it away from us. So I want to publicly declare myself in the face of the oil industry, someone who wants to out them and expose them for what they are. And I don't, guess what? I don't have the credentials to do so. I have a mind, it's a free one. I have a heart, it's a big one, and it's on the side of all of the people that have been victimized. Okay, now let's go back to the victimization perpetrated by Mr. Fetzer on John Hutchison. Okay, let's listen to this audio recording.
Well, my education is I flunked my coloring book and blocks. I'm self-taught, and I've been involved in many applications in engineering and research, and one of them happened to be into Nikola Tesla, which was able to replicate a lot of his experiments. And pushing it beyond the envelope there, we were managed to cause levitation of objects and also the destruction of objects, as it's called. And
did everyone hear that? I'm pausing here. I want you to pay attention to what he just said. A man with no credentials reproduced levitation. He actually bent a piece of solid copper 2.5 inches in diameter. Okay? Then this is a man who has the credentials of us meat and potatoes people.
And it gained interest into the U.S. military back in 1983, which they did a lot of experiments and tests with it.
So you grew up in Canada?
Yes, I did.
Whereabouts?
Oh, I'm in New Westminster, British Columbia. I grew up in North Vancouver, by the way.
In North Vancouver?
Yeah, I was away in Europe for a while and just landed in the West here.
I presume you went to school there, or high school, for example?
Well, I had a private tutor, and we were mostly I was into chemistry quite a bit, and I was in the chemical lab, also gunsmithing and machine tool work. But a little later on, I got into the Tesla stuff, which is kind of intriguing.
But you never matriculated to a university. You didn't actually earn. You don't have university degrees. You don't have an academic background or a scientific background other than what you learned in the process of your tutoring and your self-learning.
That's right. Yes, thank God for that. Because if I went the normal route and all that stuff, then I'd be programmed to not think outside the box.
Excuse me. I've been under the weather all week with a nasty case of the stomach flu. How have you made your living, John?
Well, I made my living through various, defense contractors, giving demonstrations for them, as well as that's Canadian as well as American and Germany. And of late, I've been doing a lot of television shows, and there's really high demand for that. So they pay large amounts of money for coming here to film.
And before you got into the effects and so forth, your discoveries, how were you making ends meet?
Oh, way back past 1970?
Say, anytime. Fill me in.
Wow, that's back in 1970. Prior to that, I was involved in a major court case against the Canadian government on gun control issues. And prior to that, it was just on welfare, getting odd jobs, that kind of thing. So it was a lot of fun. Not so long time ago. It seems like that.
You and Judy are kind of striking contrast cases because, of course, Judy has multiple degrees in academic background, 60 peer-reviewed articles, and your background is completely the opposite.
Yeah, kind of wild and woolly there, but it's been an interesting adventure. I get along fine with the scientists and that. We work together on different projects.
Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, I've noticed something different with John than the typical student. John thinks. The students program. Well, they check the answer to the back of the book, and that
So very interesting interchange there. But I believe Mr. Hutchison represented himself honestly. I mean, he talked about and he did so. He was recently featured in Jesse Ventura's episode. And if you want to go back and see that, it's actually on the internet. You can actually download it, but you can see what Mr. Hutchison has been working on. Now, the key elements are on the other side of the coin. We have a Dr. Judy Wood, who is credentialed. He's admitted that she has the education, she has the credibility to bring these issues forward. So it is important. But you'll notice part of the psychological operation is to, for him to call her Judy and to minimize her and to decredentialize her just by referring her to Judy and take away her doctor status. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole number of tricks like that which we've noticed
very subtle
over the years, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if you look at those questions to John Hutchison, it sort of went way beyond what you would normally ask a guest. Asking them to go back. Oh, do you have a university education? Why ask that question? Mm-hmm. Why not ask there? John, for example, said, "Oh, I did some work for the U.S. military." Mm-hmm. My automatic was, "Well, what did you do? What? Which was it? Air Force? Was it Army? Was it Navy? Where did you work? What sort of projects were you involved with?" Those are the questions that I would ask. Mm-hmm. Not so that means you haven't got an education then,
Right.
So and as you say, John had no qualms about answering any of the questions. He was perfectly candid and quite jovial about it. Well, I think he was quite pleased with himself. He realised that he'd been able to do all these things and was justifiably proud of that.
Right.
So he didn't try and cover anything up. He had no need to because he was telling the truth.
Could you touch on this? Okay, and a lot of people are coming awake to these facts that Mr. Hutchison has been able to replicate a lot of the things that took place on 9/11 that's in the evidence. Are you aware of those things? Could you list those for the audience?
Yeah, certainly. Well, if you look at the pages on Dr. Wood's website, basically John has reproduced levitation. We saw levitation of witnesses on 9/11 and things like we had upside down police cars and so on, mm-hmm. fire trucks.
Right.
We've had the bent metal, and as you mentioned there, John has got a number of samples where the metal has become either bent into a horseshoe shape, such as a copper bar, and we've seen bars which are held by WJE for NIST have the same deformation pattern with no wrinkles and no burn marks. We have peeling effects within the metal, like it's delaminated. Some of the samples that John Hutchison have exhibited this, and the samples that on some of the so-called toasted cars have also got delaminated sections. Then we've had these weird fires that John has seen in a number of his experiments. Things appearing to combust, and then we've we've also seen the cars exploding near the World Trade Center, or say exploding not in the sense of a bomb going off, but exploding into flame. We had the Bankers Trust building, which seemed to have residual effects in it because they repaired the Bankers Trust building, and then I think in 2006 they began to take it down piece by piece, saying it had a mold infection. And if you look at the effects there, it appears to be a high level of rust on some of the beams. And there were some very strange fire events in the Bankers Trust building as well during the deconstruction, and 3 firefighters were killed. I think that was 2006 as well, or 2007. So some very strange effects there. And also low energy. No heat. If John puts his hand into his experiments and picks out the bent metal sample, it's cold. And also we saw very little evidence of heat at the World Trade Center, which is another thing that they've tried to cover up and muddle up, very much so. And that's why primarily these alternative explanations, which don't explain the evidence, involve heat of some kind. Nanothermite, nuclear devices, and their variants are all hot phenomena.
Yes. Now, the key element, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this, is that Mr. Hutchison has been able to replicate things, even on a smaller scale, with respect to levitation. There was a scientist named George Pigott, who was in Where Did the Towers Go?, who essentially, as a scientist, way back when, I don't have it in front of me, but he, Mr. Hutchison, was able to replicate that process whereby in a static field you could cause levitation, correct? As I understand it.
It appears there are a number of ways of doing that. There was another chap called Thomas Townsend Brown who reproduced these sorts of effects, working with somebody called Biefeld. I can't remember Biefeld's first name. And Biefeld, he knew Einstein. So these were, in their day, very high up scientists. And some of these people do know that this technology is real. It's just that, for example, if you read Nick Cook's book, The Hunt for Zero Point, Nick Cook is a defense journalist, he sort of points out that a lot of the anti-gravity research seemed to go underground in the mid-50s, about 1956. That appears to be when a lot of this technology went into the black world, which, of course, was not too long after the National Security Council had been set up in 1947 and so forth. So the security apparatus of the United States was getting fairly well established, and of course everyone was getting pumped up with oil, and the oil companies were starting to get pretty rich by then, and of course that trend has continued since then. Right.
Now, I'm gonna finalize these thoughts and why it's important for the listener and the lay person. And I call, our people, the majority of us here on this planet, of the 7 billion people, we're just basic people that are just trying to understand the world around us. Most of us relying upon the information that's given to us. But this static energy field, okay, and the process by which, even on a small scale, you create this static field, okay, and you essentially introduce energy into that field and cause, we're going to call it molecular dissociation, right? Cause certain things to happen within that static field. That is potentially what took place as far as our understanding of it based on the evidence. Let's say, for instance, we created an energy field around the World Trade Center and then caused something to happen to where everything just dustifies. It's important to understand that process. And that is contained in Where the Towers Go. And a lot of these processes were duplicated by Mr. Hutchison. That's why his work has been so important. So the bending of steel and how that took place within the static energy field. Well, was he able to bend a 2.5-inch piece of copper just right there, right in front of everyone's eyes? It's been witnessed. He's replicated this process, and it could be associated with what happened on 9/11.
Right. I mean, that's it. I mean, John's replicated this many, many times, and this is one of these myths that you come across. Oh, he can't replicate it. Well, if he can't replicate it, how come he's got 500 pounds of metal samples then? Did he just do that in one go? I mean, these are the sort of lies that get promulgated, and then people just repeat them. So that's how the psychological operation works. Right. But underlying that, yes, the description that you gave there is to my knowledge, pretty accurate. And if you introduce and mix together certain forms of energy, such as radio frequency energy, which John was using, microwave energy, and as you say, a static field from something like a Van de Graaff generator or a Tesla coil, you can get some very unusual effects coming out, but you have to do it in specific ways. And it takes a long time to, get this set up. But people like John Hutchison was visited by the military-industrial complex in 1983, headed up by Colonel John Alexander. And you can go and listen to John Alexander talking about his visit to John Hutchison. He doesn't make any secret of it, but he claims that what John Hutchison was doing was psychokinesis. So we can see clearly that there is a direct line into the military-industrial complex that knows about John Hutchison's research.
Right.
And, and it's 18 years from 1983 to 2001.
Right.
And from our understanding, John Alexander already knew, already understood what John Hutchison was doing when he first went there. So they probably already had the technology at that time.
Okay.
Would be my guess. So it's very important to understand that yes, the evidence is all there. All you need to do is study it and essentially convince yourself. I'm not out to convince anybody of anything. All I've done is made my experience and knowledge available for people to study for themselves.
That's right.
And if they want to take a look at it, fantastic. And if they want to write to me and ask me questions to clarify something, I'll be over the moon, and I will do my best to answer their questions if they're asked in a respectful manner.
Based on what you've learned here, and before we go to the break here, I want to ask you this key question. Based on what you've learned about what took place on 9/11, is there evidence that levitation occurred on 9/11? Is there evidence?
Oh, yeah, very much so, yes.
There is evidence, very clearly. So that's the first question. Secondly, has that process of levitation been replicated by Mr. Hutchison?
Correct, it has,
okay.
Yes.
And is there a patent that George Pigott has, and it's contained in the book? There is a patent for reproducing in this electrostatic field. Now, most people find this to be unfathomable. And then when they hear from reputable individuals in alternative media, like Alex Jones, who call it space beams, don't you think that's a diversion tactic?
It is. I mean, Alex Jones as well. I mean, one thing we should discuss here, which we discussed in the break, was that, I understand that this evidence.
We're going to cover this. We're going to cover this right after the break. Stay right there,
okay.
Andrew. Yep, we have 9 seconds. We come back. We are going to talk about what Alex Jones's role has been in keeping your mind away from these very important facts. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by Andrew Johnson, who has done over the past 10 years to not only satisfy his curiosity, but to address and find and seek the truth. And he has learned how to sift through the truth tellers and the truth distractors. But let me conclude my point here, because the listener can say to themselves, why is this important, this Hutchison thing? And you're talking about levitation. It sounds like all a bunch of hocus pocus. Really, I mean, a lot of people coming new to this and awakening to it need to realize that people like George Pigott and his we can say it, George Pigott and his levitating balls. Okay, he has a patent for doing such a thing, and also very important thing that we must understand, and here's the crux of the entire conspiracy, the cover-up, and the reason why it took place. There was a man named Nikola Tesla, and in 1901, he started building something called a Wardenclyffe Tower. And very simply put, this is what I've learned about it through this whole experience right in front of our listening audience. Nikola Tesla figured out a way to build a tower, a massive tower. We're talking about these concepts on a very large scale, to where he could take out of the ionosphere energy to be distributed to everyone in the entire world. And we could essentially get free electricity. J.P. Morgan financed that. The banksters financed that. And J.P. Morgan said, I can't put a meter on it and make money off of the backs of the slaves of the population. We are hereby going to stop this project. And he shut down Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla's research library was burnt down. This man took a beating, and Nikola Tesla had discovered things that are so important, just like John Hutchison in replicating these things. He's replicated it through his knowledge of Nikola Tesla. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you as the listeners need to know that what took place on 9/11, potentially because of the anomalies that took place, the levitation and the spontaneous combustion and the dustification of that building. Now, today, you may be for the first time realizing that the people who have access to that same energy that Nikola Tesla wanted to give to the people of the world, it's been concealed from you. And there's a concerted effort to cover it up, to keep it away. And that power and that energy is being used by evil people who killed 3,000 people on 9/11 and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people since then. Is that a pretty accurate depiction, Andrew Johnson, of what's happening here to the world population, not just to the United States?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is why it's very important. It's a global thing related to energy. And as you say, this story really goes back about 100 years, almost 100 years. And the tie-in with the bankers is, you can see right there that they were beginning to establish their power as, in the energy domain, if you put it like that, around the time that Nikola Tesla was doing this research. And they essentially shut him down. They made him so he couldn't do any real damage. And they were, they took from him the technology that they needed to, basically make a money machine for themselves, money-making machine, which was the electrical current transmission system. Mm-hmm. And Tesla's system was better than Edison's system because it used an alternating current, whereas Edison's system used direct current, right. and Tesla's system was much more efficient. So that was the regular energy distribution system. Right. But then Tesla went and worked on this wireless system, which was what the Wardenclyffe Tower was all to do with, and that ended up being blown up. And I just looked up the date, and it was 1917. So yeah, absolutely, yes, it's very fundamental to the way that our world works. It's right. The energy question is fundamental to everything. Once you have free energy, you can have as much clean water as you need, you can build as taller buildings as you need, right. You can have whatever propulsion systems that you need, right. And it will completely transform the nature of our society. It will change the whole geopolitical structure of the world. That's right. And that's why it's so very, very dangerous for the status quo. It is the single most dangerous thing to the existing status quo, right. Is the energy issue. Yes, sir. Once it is known and understood that we can have as much energy as we need, right. to do whatever we need to do it with, then everything changes. Everything changes. In the essence of time, I want to transition from that thought, okay? Because there are literally tens of millions of people who have been listening to somebody at the top of the so-called alternative media, which I believe right now has been compromised, unless they come out and talk about these issues. But have you ever listened to Alex Jones? Have you listened to him? I have, and okay. we were talking a bit about him in the break before, and here's my question. Hold on one second as you answer this. This is the most important question that I've been asking myself. Have you ever heard him discuss these most important inventions and the most important evidence that took place on 9/11? Have you ever heard him mention that on the air? Well, I think he's probably mentioned energy. He's probably I know he's talked about peak oil, for example, being a scam, which I agree with. Mm-hmm. I agree that peak oil is a scam, but he has not connected the energy issue to 9/11, and I believe the reason why he has not done that is because not many people have heard of Nikola Tesla in the wider scheme of things, but just about everyone in the world has heard of 9/11. So it's very, very dangerous to connect these ideas of 9/11 and the energy issue together and talk about the evidence which connects them. Now, people might say, well, Alex Jones is just, he just hasn't come across this, but we can clearly see that that's not true because he has, he's already ridiculed this research. He's described it as space beams. He's described Dr. Judy Wood as, or implied that she is Marvin the Martian in a discussion with Stephen E. Jones a few years ago. Right. He has bigged up Stephen E. Jones, claiming that he's got all these credentials and he works for the government and he's headed up research for Los Alamos National Laboratories, which of course is where they developed the atomic bomb. So is it that Alex Jones just hasn't come across this? Is he not smart enough to sort of discuss it? Well, clearly those things are not true. Alex Jones is very smart. He's a very intelligent, very articulate man. He knows what he's talking about. Right. He's had every opportunity in the last, this research has been on the table since 2006. The Hudson effect research has been on the table since 2008. So we're coming up to the 5-year mark now. Right. And Alex Jones still hasn't given it a proper discussion with his 30 million listeners or however many it is. So whatever he's doing, whether he is a willing participant or an unwitting participant, he is now part of the cover-up, the most important cover-up in the world. And Alex Jones is now a part of that. I don't care whether he's a Jesuit or a Zionist or whatever it is. He has covered up the study of this research and this evidence, which proves the connection between 9/11 and energy. That's right. It is the most important question before us for the reasons that I've already stated.
Credentialism and holding nuclear scientists or scientific researchers and all those people that establish credibility to come out and propagate the falsities on behalf of the oil industry. I think that's where the big money comes from, of course. But we can hold that same level of accountability to somebody like Alex Jones in alternative media, that he is credentialed by his experience, by his knowledge. He's very, very smart, okay? And we can hold him accountable that if he does not know this and he does not share this with people, he can therefore, in my eyes, as a layperson, be considered suspect. Why would he be wanting to hold this? Because I hold him accountable to all of his knowledge, all of his experience, and him calling himself, he's a self-proclaimed 9/11 truther. And for him not to disclose this factual scientific information would cause us all to consider him to be suspect, correct?
Well, I certainly do.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I've made mistakes in the past in my own research. I used to believe the thermite story. I used to believe the official story of 9/11, and I've said that many times in the presentations that I've given. But I've now realized that I was wrong, and I freely admit that. I don't have a problem admitting that originally what I found out and what I thought was wrong.
Right.
And I've never heard Alex Jones say anything like that. I've never heard him express that kind of humility, which is actually one of the important factors. And we've touched on that essentially already in our discussion. So that's another factor. If you find out that you're wrong, don't be afraid to admit it.
That's right.
And there are many psychological triggers which we are encouraged not to do that. Politicians, for example, will never admit that they were wrong. Scientists will rarely admit that they were wrong when they discover something. They'll always try and say, well, actually, they'll make excuses. Well, don't bother. Don't waste the time. Just say, look, I was wrong. This is why I thought what I thought, and now I know that was wrong, and this is why I now know that this is true.
In the remaining moments here, we have just a couple of minutes left. Andrew's book can be downloaded, tinyurl.com/911 FTB. And you will also find that copy. I will have it on our website from now until 7 billion people know about it. Okay? I will have it on my website. Now, of course, I want you to take these remaining moments and share your final thoughts with our listening audience. And Andrew Johnson, this has been a great, great conversation as a follow-up to Dr. Judy Wood's presentation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I suppose there's one thing I should add, really, to the discussion. One of the things that is often, and I think even your caller mentioned it, Dr. Judy Wood's theory. Dr. Judy Wood doesn't have a theory. What she does have is a set of evidence. And I'd like to point out that if you wanted to prosecute somebody in a court, you couldn't do it using a theory. You have to take evidence to the court. And that's exactly what Dr. Judy Wood did with the help of attorney Jerry Leapart in 2007. And she laid the foundation for the legal case using the request for correction to NIST in 2007, and then she built that the follow-up to that into this court case, a Ketam case for science fraud against 23 of the contractors that NIST used to write the technical reports, and you can read about that on her website.
Awesome. Andrew Johnson, thank you. Here are my final words to anyone out there. And I've called out Mr. Gordon Duff. I know that you have the heart, mind, and soul to come forward and say, maybe I haven't looked at it right. And I want you to come on the Pete Santilli show and admit that in front of the public. That way you can join all 7 billion of us. Alex Jones, it's time for you to come forward and reveal the truth about what you may have been either intentionally or unintentionally concealing from the entire world. I encourage you to come forward. That would be the only instance where you could come on the Pete Santilli show. I have an open invitation to you, but only to discuss those issues. Good day, everybody, and stay awake. December 21st, the day of awakening. Let's do this right. Good day. I'm going to ask him if he wants to take some questions and field some questions from the chat room. And Andrew Johnson?
Yep.
Sir, with your permission, I don't know what your schedule looks like, but would you be willing to stay with us for a few moments to answer some questions from our chat room?
By all means, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And Susanna Cole, awesome show.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Awesome show. Andrew, seriously, thank you so much.
Andrew Johnson.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, this has been. I can't tell you how many people have come to me, sent me personal notes. Susanna Cole, you see some of the messages that come through to Pete at the PeteSantilliShow.com. People who are literally waking up right in front of us. It's the first time they're touched by this information. Andrew, I'm sure you get tremendous gratification from this over the past several years. Watching people awaken.
Yeah, I mean, it's, certainly in the last sort of 6 months, I don't get, like hundreds of emails or anything. I've had probably 4 or 5 really quite interested emails and with some quite heartfelt, sort of emotions in there. One guy wrote to me, and it's very interesting actually, because he actually went down to ground zero, I think, on 9/11 or the day after, and they smuggled themselves into the site with one of their brothers had a police, he was a policeman or something, and they got in with his card or something. I can't remember his badge or something, and they were walking around the place, and then he'd only found Dr. Wood's book within the last 2 or 3 months. And in fact, what happened was, I know what happened. I remember the story. Hurricane Sandy had gone past. He was in Connecticut, and his power had gone out, and the only thing he had was his Kindle. And he downloaded 9/11 Finding the Truth onto his Kindle, and he started to read it. And then he logged on, and he got Dr. Wood's book when his power came back on. And he wrote to me, and he said, he told me about all this story about him going to ground zero, and he never really thought anything of it. He thought it was a bit weird, but he didn't understand it. And then he said at the end of this message, which was fairly long, and he said, I don't know whether to thank you or to hate you or something.
All right.
Because it had been such a it was just such a rough ride for him, but I think he was glad that he finally was able to make sense of things, but he was very uncomfortable, obviously, what he was having to come to terms with.
Yep. I have a question here, and this comes from, we have a couple questions here. I am Aquarius, but I'm under the impression something will come out of that will change people's thinking. Okay, there's a comment about, I think, December 21st. Andrew, is there a community anywhere that is fully informed on free energy and is taking steps towards utilizing the technology to benefit all?
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I'm not an expert on all those various communities. I've heard that there is a community, I think, in Sweden or Switzerland, a small village or town, that actually has spirited away a free energy generator on which they run their village, and they keep it very secret. And a few people have apparently seen this, but it's almost become mythological now, because I don't know exactly where this is, and I heard of this story a few years ago. What I found is I've put together a presentation called Infinite Energy, but not for the masses, and that's on my website. And I think I mentioned in the conversation we had a couple of days ago, Pete, that this character, Stephen Greer, who set up this free energy group called Seize Power in 2006.
Yes, this is important, yes. Mm-hmm.
And then he basically, that didn't go anywhere. And then he kind of said, I'm going to start a free energy group in 2007 called Aero 2012. And it was as if the first one never existed, because he never even mentioned it. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of groups like that around. And if you go on to brucedepalmer.com and you download the Bruce De Palmer, there's a PDF file about Bruce. Is it Bruce?
Can you spell that? It's Bruce and
I'll type it for you.
Okay.
In the thing.
Okay.
You can paste it in the chat window. In fact, if I put it in there, that's both of you, isn't it?
Okay. So, awesome.
Bruce De Palmer. Okay. .com, I think. Or something I can't type. If you go to that website, let's just see if I've got that right. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah. There's some PDFs that you can download there, and there's some from a chap called Adam Trombley, who invented a device called a homopolar generator, or it was based on it was actually a closed path homopolar generator. You can find details on there somewhere, I think. And Adam Trombley.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if it's.
I didn't receive that. I didn't receive that message, by the way. It's Bruce D. Palma, DEPAL.
I've put it in the shared. Oh, in fact, it's gone.
Oh, you did. Okay.
It's in the
chat room. Okay, fantastic.
I'll put it in yours as well.
Okay, excellent.
What Adam Trombley sort of alludes to is that most of the free energy movement is as controlled and infiltrated as just in the same way that we've been talking about 9/11. Mm-hmm. And there's trolls around every corner. And what I've documented is that the problem with the free energy scene is that there are a number of free energy devices around that work, and people have used them and use them to produce small amounts of free energy up to a few kilowatts in size. But when they try and put them into commercial production, that's when the problems start, because you can get small investors interested, and they'll bring in maybe $1 million or something to get the first production run financed or whatever. But then they'll come up against health and safety regulations. Then they'll come up against other regulations, and questions start being asked. And of course, when the questions start being asked, those questions and those answers get fed back up and up the chain into these secret networks, and that's when the influence starts coming back down the chain, and things get shut down again.
Right.
I mean, you can go and look at one of the examples I looked at was this fairly recent one. Let's see for lutech.com.au.
By the way, I have a follow-up question to that availability of the free energy stuff when you're ready to take my question. I believe it's an important one. Are you personally afraid of the power of big oil? That's who we're going up against. Are you afraid of them?
I'm not personally at the moment afraid of the power of big oil. Personally, me, Andrew Johnson, because I'm no threat to them. I'm a nobody with a website that gets 700 hits on a good day, which is nothing. They don't need to worry about somebody like me. I'm just irrelevant, and they can pass me off as just some,
I can promise you that's going to change overnight. But go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've never been threatened up to now.
No. I mean, your website traffic. I mean, not the threats.
Okay.
No.
Well, maybe I'll get a few more. I'll get a few more hits.
No, you'll get more than 700 hits. I promise you.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I've had spikes, into the couple of thousands or whatever.
Right.
But I do know that these people come and look at the website. I know that Science Application International, they've been poking around on there in the past. ARA, I think, have been on there. Sandia Labs, which is one of the Black Ops labs, they've been poking around. In fact, all those sorts of places have come to poke around my website in the past. So they know what I've got on there, but they don't care, because we just don't have the exposure.
Well, here's my question.
Can I say something here?
Go ahead.
Can I say something real quick? Before this gets away from us, we have someone in the chat that wanted you to know their name is Pono, and they wanted you to know they don't have a question, but would like to thank you for all your work.
Well, thank you very much. Well, if you can thank them back, that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Yep. And
just did.
Hold on just one second. I need to stop and restart. Here we are in the After Hours segment. So back to our question. I have a question here. There is momentum right now. I believe that there's momentum as far as our awakening. Probably because I feel it, as I'm right in the center of it. But I'm just a basic, average meat and potatoes kind of person with a microphone. And I believe that we've got some pretty good reach as people wake up. Here are my philosophies that I tell all of our listening audience. Never really trust anybody. Research and read and listen to everything you can get your hands on. And, of course, never fully believe anything that you haven't researched yourself. On those principles, our show is growing by leaps and bounds. Do you believe that we can have this mass awakening that we need in a short period of time? It needs to happen in a short period of time. Do you believe that our efforts will grow exponentially and more people will become aware to this?
I'm not seeing any signs of that at the moment. That's at large scale. I'm seeing signs that it's happening. It is happening, but I think the rate at which it's happening is relatively. I think there's an undercurrent, if you will. I mean, the biggest thing will come when people start switching off TV and ditching the newspapers. If we see that happening in large numbers, then there'll be some hope. But I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing it in my family around me. I mean, for example, if I look at my own family, I've got quite a large immediate family, and only one or two of those seem to have any type of interest in what I'm saying and doing, and the rest just they don't want to know. They really don't want to know.
They don't want to know.
No, so until that changes substantially, I don't see things changing rapidly. I could be wrong, but there's definitely an undercurrent, but it's not something that's going to sweep away these huge walls that are in front of us just yet. Yeah. Going on the experience we had, for example, when Dr. Wood did the talks in. We got invited to do a talk in Bologna in 2011, and when these guys had confirmed they were going to invite us, and they said they were going to pay the airfares, I put the word out that Dr. Wood was going to come and do some stuff in the UK, and we had 2 or 3 groups that said, "Oh yeah, we'll if you could come and do a talk with us, that'd be great. We'll set up the room and we'll pay the train fare and so on," and and that happened. I think we got 2 or 3 talks, maybe 4 talks last year, but then we had about 7 this year, 7 or 8. So it kind of doubled this year. So there was double the interest. So that was a good sign. I can obviously see that. That there's been a progress there, but positive progress. So that's I suppose the only way I can answer that question. Now in relation to this directly.
Yeah. Now you've been in this business of communicating this knowledge that you've acquired on your own and helping to share Dr. Judy's research. How do you recommend that somebody that's just now coming awake to it? I mean, obviously, they need to be very careful what they say as to how they've received this information. They could be out there talking about, red hot molten metal and stuff like that muddles everything up. But how do you recommend that somebody shares this information with their friends and family?
Well, what they can do is, on my website, I've got some PDF booklets, which are very short, like about they're 10 pages long, and they're just basically basic set of pictures and questions about 9/11. And I've got, obviously, I give out these DVDs as well. And they're, I think, a good starting point if people are wanting to just say, well, have a look at this, see what you think of it. And I've tried to make those materials available. They're not, they're not totally brilliant. They're not. I'm not a professional, desktop publishing artist or anything. But I think they're perfectly adequate as teaching aids. I'm used to developing teaching aids for the tutoring work that I've done, and they're kind of along those lines to some extent, perhaps even simpler than a lot of the other materials that I've used in my own sort of tutoring and stuff. So that's a starting point. You could get a little banner made. There's a chap called Matt Nouse. He's got this. He's got a link where you can just download the banner and get that made. I think for about $40 or something, and walk down the street with that or something, if you feel so inclined. You could get posters done if people want to design a poster or something and send me a PDF of it. Say, is this okay, Andrew? Do you think this gets the message across properly? I'm happy to look at that and say yes, and that'll be good, or maybe you can change this heading or something. Because, like you say, we do get people putting they'll say, oh, the tower's vaporized, for example, and they think they're giving the right description, but actually they didn't vaporize, they turned to dust, and it's important to distinguish between those two. So there are little things like that, that you've got to be a bit careful about. So DVDs, posters, people can write to me about those. We don't have any distributor in the US for such things particularly, although I know Matt Nouse. I can put people in touch with Matt Nouse. He's got some materials, I think. He can send them DVDs of some of the lectures and so on.
Let me ask you something. What we have a broad and diverse group of people in our listenership. Where do you need help? I mean, we need volunteers to assist you. I mean, do you need any particular area of help? I mean, graphic artists, maybe to do an infographic or anything like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, if again, I'm if people want to take some of the graphics, say on Dr. Wood's website, some of the key pictures, right, this sort of thing, and put them into an attractive design. I can point them at flyers and things that I've done. I've got a couple of leaflets that I distribute. So if people want to write to me, and I can give them the link to those or attach them to an email, and if they can make a better job than I have, fantastic. I'm happy to send them those. And if they think, that's a bit ropey, I can do better than that, fantastic.
Awesome.
If they can get the same information, but in a better format, then brilliant. Just write to me and I'll send them the links. And
an important thing to communicate, and you probably emphasize this point, we don't necessarily set up talking points for our brainwashing, but we do believe that it's important. Like I had to deprogram myself and not say collapse. The demise of the towers is so much more important, because saying collapse implies something completely different than what actually happens. But that muddling could take place if we're not using the proper terminology, because we literally have to deprogram everyone from the PSYOP.
Right, and if people want to just check if they're going to do anything like make a post, then absolutely don't put why did the towers collapse or whatever. Obviously put how were they destroyed. As another way of putting that. Absolutely, the language is more important than you might think at this point in terms of the description of things, because otherwise people are going to get in the wrong end of the stick. Right.
We have to counter the cover up. Yeah.
Yeah. The other general point that I make is some people are just not ready for this information. However you present it,
right?
However much you simplify it, or however compelling you make it, however visually appealing you make it, some people are not ready for it. So if you get into the point where it's not really, it's not going in. Don't ruin your friendships. Don't ruin your relationships. I've managed quite well in that I haven't really ruined any of my relationships or friendships. There's quite a number of people I've kind of drifted away from, and I don't have the same interactions with them as I did, but nevertheless I've managed not to upset people, if you see what I mean. The door is still open to them communicating with me,
right?
If they wish to do that. In other words, I've never turned around and said to one, "Oh, you're just an idiot," because you won't accept that the tower stood. I think you're just an idiot, and I just think you're being stupid. I've never said that to anyone.
Right.
And if you can resist saying that to anyone, I think ultimately it'll work out better. People have alienated families and friends and caused a lot of grief over this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it can always be avoided. I'm not saying that. I mean, people grow and change, and
you know what, Andrew? I'm sure you'll agree with this. I have, through my own personal experience, from the point at which I discovered around 2006 that 9/11 was an inside job. When I settled into that reality, there's an emotional process you have to go through that needs to fall in line with how you communicate this. Because if you run around and you're like, "Oh my God, 9/11 was an inside job, nanothermite, blah, 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 blah," and you start just babbling stuff at somebody that has no idea how to receive that, if you haven't learned how to communicate this to somebody effectively, or you haven't recognized what phase of the emotional process, literally a grieving process almost.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It is very much like that, yeah.
You have to learn your way through how to communicate with the people around you. Otherwise, they're going to think you're a wingnut.
We get a lot of people that come in and they have their own ideas about how things are going, their own theories, their own research. They come in and especially in our chat, and they want everybody to know what they've found, and they're excited about it.
Right.
And if they get any kind of backlash or any kind of question about it, somebody's like, I don't know, because they've never looked at it the way that person has looked at. Man, they get very angry. They get very aggressive. Would be the word. They get aggressive, and and it's like, and it doesn't. Then everybody starts arguing and start calling each other names, and then all is lost.
Yeah, like how I call trolls names. I love that sometimes, but that's mainly instigatory. But anyways,
right.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody's a troll that disagrees. No,
but you know what? But you know what? The most skillful ones, they pose those questions very, very skillfully, because they're very, very good at the psyop. Like, oh, Peter, you really don't have a lot of listeners. Oh, really? Okay. Well, have you heard me mention that I'd rather stay small, lean, with a bunch of people that are very well educated, have free minds? And I don't want millions of listeners like Alex Jones. I want a very small listenership of people that don't trust anybody and they only believe what they research themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And that are not willing to exclude any part of the evidence. But anyways, Andrew, I thank you so much for all of your time. Do you have anything further to add here on this after hour segment?
Well, we do have a question, Andrew. Excuse me.
Yeah, please.
It was asked some time ago, so I thought maybe you might want to hear this one. It says, do you know or have you heard of Sterling Allen and PestWiki.com?
Oh, yes, very much so. Yes, actually, Sterling Allen was one of the speakers at the Energy Conference in Holland. So I didn't speak with him there, but I did meet him. He was in Dr. Wood's talk, and he was the person that was very concerned about the tritium evidence being brought up in the lecture by Dr. Wood. And he actually stood up, went to the front and asked her, told her that she'd replayed this tritium video in the previous hour, and there's no need to play it again. So Sterling Allen was very concerned about the tritium evidence in relation to what was found in the dust from the World Trade Center. He also said quite categorically that he was very good friends with Stephen E. Jones. And then, as I said in the broadcast, he posted this short article by Stephen E. Jones just after the conference about cold fusion, in relation to cold fusion. So you can find that on PES. I think it's on the PES Wiki site, actually. Uh-huh. So yes, I'm quite familiar with Sterling Allen. And again, he's one of these guys. I have some very serious questions, which I may even email him these questions before too long. I've been meaning to do that, actually. And he said on Coast to Coast very recently, this was, I think, on the 6th of December, or maybe after that. No, it was sooner than that. I think it was last week, about a week ago. He said on Coast to Coast, this is Sterling Allen, that he'd shared a room with Nick Begich at the conference, which Nick Begich was one of the other speakers. And I might mention, actually, because Nick Begich was indeed one of the other speakers, and I indeed was one of the audience in his presentation, which was about HAARP. Mm-hmm. And that presentation was recorded, as was my question to Mr. Begich, who, as you know, is a son of former Senator Begich,
yes,
who was killed in a plane crash, I believe. But I asked Nick Begich why, in 2006, when he was speaking to Art Bell on Coast to Coast, he said that the bombing of Afghanistan was justified. And I've got an audio recording of actually saying that the bombing of Afghanistan was justified, and indeed that the USA was justified in stomping them back to the Stone Age, to use Nick Begich's expression.
Wow.
And I know for a fact, because I was there, that Mr. Begich sat and watched Dr. Wood's presentation at said conference in Holland. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of his presentation, I thanked him for bringing forward the information about the HAARP array, which I think he's nevertheless played an important role in helping to raise the awareness of that rather unpleasant type of project. Mm-hmm. But I asked him, now that he'd sat through Dr. Wood's presentation, and there was no doubt at all that Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with the destruction of the World Trade Center, and indeed there was no evidence to suggest that that was true, if he still considered that the bombing of Afghanistan was justified.
Fair question. Mm-hmm.
And his answer was very interesting, because he said there are a lot of questions about 9/11, but if people want to have a theocracy, they can have a theocracy, and if they want a democracy, they can have a democracy. And then he said, people in this room would be quite surprised at my attitude to warfare and defense, and he didn't answer my question. In other words, he didn't say, oh, well, actually, now I've changed my mind and I realise I was wrong to state that the bombing of Afghanistan was justified. He didn't say that. And after I'd asked that question and after he'd answered it, I had several people came up to me in the room afterwards with very open very open-mouthed and very ashen looks on their face, because they realised that what Mr. Begich was part of the psychological operation, which was trying to justify the existence of HAARP. Because if you listen to the way that his talk unfolded, and how, for example, Mr. Begich stated that he'd been invited to a closed conference on a ship for 12 days with the Aga Khan as one of the other people, as a part of the conference delegates, and he was bragging about that, I think people began to get an impression of where Mr. Begich was.
Very interesting.
In the pecking order of things. And that's all been recorded, and I'm hoping that will be posted on their videos before too long. In fact, I can probably get a hold of recordings on somebody else.
Yeah, can you send that to me as soon as possible? Because I do have contact, and I've had him on my show, Dr. Nick Begich. And I'd like to.
I'll try and get hold of the recording. The recording that I know was made was by a friend of mine. I should have recorded it myself actually, but that was the long and the short of it. So he's up to something. I don't know exactly what it is, but he's definitely up to something.
I definitely want to speak with him. There are people. I want to have Richard Gage on the show. He actually backed out of an interview. It just so happens that right after Dr. Judy's Thursday and Friday presentation last week, that Richard Gage was going to be on a show here in Los Angeles, and I had made contact with the host here it was a pretty big AM station, and he had basically awakened to a lot of the questions that he was going to pose to Richard Gage. And Richard Gage actually backed out of the interview. So I want to have Richard Gage on my show. I want to speak with him. I'd love to invite Stephen Jones and all of these people and just to approach these very serious questions that need to be posed, and they need to answer them publicly.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get them on and get them to, if they've got an honest answer, then I'm great. If they're willing to say, well, I was wrong, and if they've got a good, even better, if they've got a good an explanation that hangs together and shows that what we've said is wrong, then I've been sat here now for 4 years waiting for somebody to actually find fault with something that we've said, rather than just attack a character or pick on a little detail which doesn't really change anything.
That's right.
But nobody's been able to do that in 4 years. So I'm still doing the same things that I've been doing all that time.
Absolutely, sir. You are coming up on December 21st, just as we are. We are all together on December 21st. The Mayan calendar ends. What do you think is going to happen, sir? I know you're not in the business of making predictions, but what are your thoughts?
Well, my general feeling about the 2012 scenario is there is definitely something going on in terms of, the very fact that we're doing this and you're doing your program the way you are. I think that is indicative of a larger process that's going on. And it does appear to involve a shift in the way that we perceive things, And the other day, for example, we were discussing this whole thing with the Batman movie, weren't we? And the weirdness with the Batman movie and the shooting, and the fact that somebody's been able to see that very quickly after the events, to me, indicates that there is a level of perception in the population which is much, much higher now than it was a few years ago, or is in much greater abundance than it was a few years ago. And I think that is indeed indicative of some larger scale process. I don't think the world is going to end on December the 21st, and I don't think there is going to be some huge cataclysm, but there is no denying, for example, that there's been an increase in the number and severity of the earthquakes. Is that some process involving the Earth itself, or is it being done with technology? As we've asked the question, if you look at how the towers were destroyed, scale that technology up or move it in a different direction, can it cause all these earthquakes and so on?
Right.
So I don't know. I think things are going on
within. I'm sorry.
But whether there's going to be some great big event on the 21st, well, I doubt that, frankly, at this point.
Within the past week, as a matter of fact, I used to think that, December 21st is going to come and go like Y2K. So I kind of scoffed at it. And within the past week, I've realized that something powerful is happening right now in our presence. And you just stated it. that we now have a population, even if it's a small portion, but it could grow exponentially, of people that are awake, aware, and a level of consciousness could take place right around this time, December 21st, and it's happening, coincidentally, right in line with it. But I agree that December 21st could be not an end to anything, but a beginning of something huge for fellow man, right?
Right, and I think somebody else pointed out to me that there was, if you look at 9/11, was I think it's obviously 11 years before. It's very nearly 11 years from 9/11 to where we are now. Well, it is 11 years from where we are to now, but I think it's 11 years and then a number of days. And if you count the number of days, that's got a significance to the number 11 as well. So it's interesting that 9/11 was in the new millennium. Because there was no year zero, so effectively 2001 was the new millennium, according to the mathematicians at least. And then here we are 11 years later, just before 2012. So there is some significance in the numerology, I think, somehow, some way, shape, or form. But the stuff, there is stuff going on, and maybe we're at the central point of this process, and we're moving forward now into this new area, which is where we can create our own world more. We've got more of an ability to create our own future rather than being under the purview of this secret group that's running things. They're not going to have it all their own way from this point forwards.
No.
If they did, we wouldn't still be here.
That's right. Dr. Judy says he who controls the energy controls the people. And I believe that they're using this energy for evil as a weapon. But I believe, and I'd like to conclude this after-hour session with your thoughts on the fact that I believe that the greatest weapon in the history of mankind will be the Grand Awakening. That they will never be able to use any weapon against us other than just wiping us out as a population. But it's the best weapon that we have to oppose them is awareness and knowledge.
I think that's it. I think once you make yourself aware, then you can break free of the mass consciousness. That's what actually somebody said that to me about. I think it was about 2005. They said, look, you've, because of the way that you've approached this, you've broken free of mass consciousness. You're thinking independently, and when you reach that point, your whole life changes, like you were saying earlier on. And this is 9/11 is one of those things that can, when you study it and work it out, it forces you to break away from that mindset and start exploring your own avenues on your own terms, So I think that's the knowledge, gaining knowledge.
Yeah.
is obviously the trigger for that.
I think that we have very, very simply in a language that everyone can understand. Hold on a second. In a language that we can understand, all understand, that is. I believe that we've laid things out in this episode and in Dr. Judy's presentation last week. We've given something to everyone that they can share with their friends and family. So
I hope so.
Yeah. I thank you very much for your time. And I highly encourage you, if you're listening to these words right now, this after-hour session of the Pete Santilli Show, share this with as many people as you possibly can. And, of course, go to the website, pick up a copy of Andrew Johnson's free ebook. And if you want to purchase the Where Did the Towers Go book as well, you can do that at the top of our page. So thank you very much, Andrew Johnson.
Thanks very much, Pete. Much appreciated. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for all your